Welcome to the little video lesson on President Hoover and the Great Depression. So, what he did during the Great Depression and why I guess he wasn't considered a very popular president during a very difficult time for America. So, in your notes, title President Hoover and the Great Depression. Probably I don't know, I guess one of the worst things that happened under Hoover's administration is something known as the Mexican repatriation. Really, this is just a euphemism for Mexican deportation. Uh, they are literally rounding up hundreds of thousands of Mexicans, forcing them to leave. Now, I don't want to say they were like arresting them, but you would have like federal, FBI agents, local agents showing up at Mexicans and Mexican Americans' homes, handing them train tickets, and basically just saying, "All right, 2 weeks, get ready to leave. You'd be better off in Mexico than here." So really strong arming them out of our country. And kind of the motive behind this in this time period, you got to remember this is a time where 25% unemployment. There is not a lot of money in form of relief and welfare to hand out to Americans. So, they see this as an attempt to not only open up jobs but to get rid of people that would need this type of federal relief. I think the biggest deal with this is just down here in the lower right. Most of these people are citizens. They were either naturalized, they became U.S. citizens, or literally born in America. They were just of Mexican descent. So what's staggering is a third of like Los Angeles, a third of their Mexicans, a third of the Arizona Mexican population left. And so you have this large group of ethnicity left our country, strong armed out by our government. Probably the historic importance of this down here, especially for the citizens, a huge violation of their due process. You are denying them liberty. You are denying them life in America without telling them what they did wrong. The only thing they did wrong was be Mexican. And so this is a huge violation of constitutional rights, whether it's the 5th or 14th Amendment would say you have the right to due process of the law, that they cannot just remove you from somewhere because you didn't do anything except for be Mexican. So again, this is a huge stain on the Hoover presidency, and I think just our country in general, just how we treated other people. You're going to see a theme with Hoover's policies. A lot of it is to gain money in a time where, the money is dwindling because of the start of the Depression. So this thing that I guess policy that he put out during his presidency called the Hoover moratorium. We got 1931. The big attempt here, the motive behind this is to help out Europe. Because of America going down the tubes, Europe kind of follows suit, and it's just kind of the way it goes in this world that America kind of dictates the global economy in a lot of sense. So as our stock market crash and we're going into the Depression, the European economies are doing not well either. So the big thing here was to give a 1-year halt for Germany paying off war debts. Do you remember after World War I, Germany is paying back so many war debts? And it wasn't just Germany. There was a lot of countries that were indebted to America because of World War I. So his thing here with this moratorium just means like a halt to something, would be to halt the European countries paying back their war debts. The problem is it didn't help. So you're going to see during the 30s, Germany doing really terrible. And I think the only reason I'm mentioning this, because this is kind of a footnote in U.S. history. This wasn't an attempt to help us out. It was an attempt to help out Europe. That we did try to help out Germany during this time period, and it doesn't. And you're going to see the 1930s Germany just kind of going sour. I mean, this is where Hitler comes to power. He's going to promise a stronger Germany. So we see America kind of trying to step in to help out, but it just doesn't work out. And whenever Hitler comes to power, we're in no position to help Germany get on its feet whatsoever. So here we go. The 1932. It's an election year for President Hoover. Things are probably the worst you could imagine for a president. I think the only president I can think of where things were just even worse was with Lincoln whenever the country split in half, or you could argue with President Roosevelt whenever he's running for re-election and World War II was happening. However, we were at least doing well in World War II. Our country in 1932 is awful. Depression is not only stricken America; it's a global phenomenon. We have here these working men lined up in soup lines, bread lines, unemployment rates 25%. If I haven't said it already in class, normal unemployment rates like 6 or 7. So a quarter of the American people that were employable had no jobs. And Hoover is completely against federal aid to help the needy. If I haven't said it already, his focus is on helping business. He's cool with that. He's really against helping individuals because he said that they should help themselves, that you should, by hard work and by rugged individualism, I don't want the government to give you handouts because that's just going to make you reliant on them. You should be self-reliant and pull yourselves out of this. But again, it's not happening. And so people are really blaming Hoover for this calamity. Now, a lot of the things you've seen about the Depression, you've probably just noticed was in the cities. The Midwest has a different kind of a different problem. They weren't really affected by the stock market crash. Bank failures probably hit them, but not as much as maybe a city type of area. Yeah, so this is where you see drought. And so when drought affects farmland, now you can't farm, you can't grow crops, so it affects you in a completely different manner. So this depression in America really affects almost everyone in the entire United States. So it's because of the drought then you see that phenomenon called the Dust Bowl, where the Midwest becomes this area of giant dust storms, and so then you have a lot of people then are picking up and moving to California to get away from this area. California has a lot of fertile land, so California does boom, but it really cripples the Midwest. And back to the cities, one thing you see is then these shanty towns, and I might have mentioned it in class already, Hoover's poor farms, if you will, and that's what they called them. They called them they called them Hoovervilles. These shanty towns throughout the cities where they would house thousands of people that lost their jobs, therefore lost their homes. The banks probably foreclosed on their mortgage because they couldn't pay it, or the bank just shut down, and so therefore they didn't have any money to borrow for a home. So this is just one more, I guess, sign of the times, if you will. Now, something else, and like I said, I think I've said this already, that Hoover, he's cool with helping business. He is cool with helping like banks. So one thing that is passed under him is the Federal Home Loan Bank Act. Really, the whole goal of this was to try to get home buying, try to get home building spurred, and to get people. Well, if you can build a lot of homes, then you have construction jobs, and so you're really trying to help the business of home building. You would give federal loans to people to buy homes, to construction companies to build them. Unfortunately, it is a complete failure. It did, though, and this is the significance of this, the historic significance. It laid the groundwork for the government's role in helping out the banking and housing industry. We see that today when the banks or the housing industry start going down the tubes, the government swoops in and helps out. You see, that's something that's new back then. Remember, this is a time where there's more of that laissez-faire attitude as far as the government helping out with the economy. So this is one of those first times we see the government kind of becoming more of a putting their noses into business and the economy. I think I mentioned this as far as one of the causes of the Depression. Now, this Revenue Act of 32 The depression was already in swing, but it doesn't help it. It perpetuates it. It's definitely not going to help get out of the depression. It was one of those dumb things that the government did that they truly thought would raise money for them and really kind of solve their issues. So the problem is the federal budget deficit. Now, budget deficit means, okay, so the federal government has, they need money. And so whenever you have a budget deficit, that means something like, all right, we need $1,000, but we only have $800. So that means there's a $200 deficit. You need to make that up, so you have $1,000. Well, what's the one way the government can make money? Taxes. So the solution to this budget deficit was to raise taxes. Now, it's more than just $200, $1 trillion. Can you fathom how much that is? We can't wrap our minds around how much that is. So that's so much that that's why they thought, well, we'll raise taxes. Well, the problem is when you raise taxes, you're really discouraging spending. So if you are well-to-do, which there were still a lot of well-to-do people during the Depression, raising their taxes, although that does make money, it discourages their spending, and there's no trickle-down effect. So you have them just not spending, people not buying other things because the taxes were so high. That's going to be one thing that's going to happen later with the next presidency, that the deficit's going to keep going up and up and up, but at least it doesn't put the burden on the citizens, on the people. And here we have the last straw, so to say, for Hoover. Things are going horrible for Hoover. The Depression's in full swing. I don't think it could get any worse for an American president. Well, until this. June of 32. We have, just a few months away from the presidential election. 1932 is the presidential election year. November is going to be the election, so just a short time away. Well, I get a whole bunch of World War I vets. Thousands of World War I vets who were to get a war bonus. Not in 32, though. They weren't to get it in 32. They were supposed to get it a little later. Well, their hope was that if they would go to D.C., they would to a march on D.C., they could demand their war bonus now, because they needed it right then. So they go to D.C., kind of this giant march of World War I veterans, demanding the war bonus then. Well, unfortunately, the protest gets a little violent, and what does Hoover do? Well, he calls in the federal troops. And so here you have a military clash in the middle of Washington, D.C. You have World War I veterans against federal troops, a whole bunch of civilian sideline people killed, and this just makes Hoover look terrible. He used federal troops and fired upon World War I veterans. And civilians get killed. Imagine that, like, today with, like, current war veterans and like, the police clashing. And, like, it looks really, really bad for Hoover. I mean, the election is 3 months away. There is just zero chance he's winning this one. So, when the 1932 election comes around, November of 32, well, who's this but Franklin Delano Roosevelt? We have a Republican, Hoover, versus the New York governor, the Democrat, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. You don't have to write this down, but this is what he said in his campaign speech. I pledge myself to a new deal for the American people. Remember that. The New Deal, because that's going to be the thing that's going to try to change this depression. It's really going to change how Americans interact with the government and how the government interacts with the people, because prior to the Depression, we've got to remember the federal government and their role in people's lives was very little. This New Deal is changing things. It's something that was potentially needed at the time, but it's something that's again changing how the government deals with the people.